You may recall from the previous story that Old Demon had helped Old Han's family resolve their troubles. Seeing that the river waters had receded, he and his wife left the village and headed for the riverbank. His wife followed behind, nagging that he shouldn't have brought Dong San's hunting rifle. But he insisted that after all the misfortune they'd encountered, having the rifle would provide some peace of mind. The couple hurried to the riverbank. From a distance, they saw the ferry already leaving the dock. It seemed their luck had run out, and they couldn't help but feel disappointed. Old Demon shouted at the top of his lungs, trying to signal the ferryman to slow down. He comforted himself that all beginnings are difficult and there was no need to worry. Everything would be fine. Seeing someone wanted to board, the ferryman, without hesitation, turned the boat back to the bank. He invited Old Demon and his wife aboard. After they were seated securely, the ferryman pushed the boat away from the bank. Old Demon and the ferryman struck up a conversation, asking about the river's condition recently. The ferryman said there had been a lot of rain this year, so the river level was higher than usual. His words made Old Demon feel a slight sense of unease. The two chatted idly. Also on the ferry were a mother and her child. The boy, perhaps seasick, was crying and demanding to get off and could not be consoled. No matter how his mother tried to comfort him, the boy wouldn't listen. He just kept screaming, demanding to be let off the boat at once, being incredibly stubborn. The boy's cries grew louder. Finally, in a fit of anger, the mother threatened her son. She said if he kept causing trouble, she would throw him straight into the river for the water monsters to eat. Hearing the woman's words, the ferryman was displeased. He stated that there were taboos when traveling by boat, and her words had broken one. The woman, feeling criticized by the ferryman, became a little upset. Old Demon advised her that one should not speak carelessly on a boat, as it was very dangerous. The woman felt that both the ferryman and Old Demon were ganging up on her. She couldn't understand why a simple threat to a child would provoke such a strong reaction from them. As they were talking, the boat suddenly lurched violently, as if it had struck something in the river. Old Demon quickly turned to the ferryman to ask what was happening. The ferryman said he had been navigating this waterway for many years. There were absolutely no hidden reefs in this area. The boat certainly hadn't hit a rock. Hearing this, Old Demon knew it was not a good omen. He held out his hand and told his wife to give him the hunting rifle, preparing for the worst. Just as he warned everyone to be careful, a colossal black shadow suddenly rose from the riverbed. It rammed the bottom of the boat, creating a loud bang and causing the vessel to shake violently. Old Demon knew the river was heavily flooded. He worried that some monster from upstream might have been washed down here, which would be extremely dangerous. Old Demon was not wrong. Just beneath the water's surface was a monstrous creature. Its size was comparable to a truck, and it was charging straight for their boat. Old Demon gripped the rifle tightly and stood at the boat's edge. He stared intently at the approaching shadow, without a trace of fear or hesitation. The massive shadow created a huge bulge on the river's surface. Beneath the water, two glowing green eyes, like a pair of lanterns, could be seen, a terrifying sight. Old Demon had already loaded the hunting rifle. He took careful aim and squeezed the trigger. A thunderous shot shattered the silence. Judging by the location, the shot seemed to have hit the shadow in the head. A trickle of fresh blood seeped from the point of impact, an effective strike. The shadow, in pain, dived deep into the water again. The ferryman was trembling with fear. He screamed that it was the river deity, the river god, and they had disturbed it. He blamed the woman's careless words for luring the river god to them. Now, the river god had come to take her child to eat. The ferryman said that when he was young, he heard the elders speak of it, a giant turtle that had lived in the river for countless years. That was the river deity. Seeing the ferryman and the woman begin to argue, Old Demon intervened. He reminded them that instead of fighting, it was better to find a way to get out of there as quickly as possible. Jarred by Old Demon's reminder, the ferryman came to his senses. He quickly grabbed his pole and began to paddle furiously, hoping to escape the danger. As the boat drew closer to the bank, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. They thought they had been saved and would no longer have to face the danger. However, when the boat was just a dozen meters from the shore, a powerful force from below threw it into the air. The boat shattered into splinters, unable to withstand the impact. Everyone on board was thrown into the water. Old Demon couldn't swim. He quickly grabbed onto a plank, stabilized himself, and then pulled his wife up. The couple had just caught their breath when they heard a blood-curdling scream. Turning their heads, they saw the woman's son had been flung far away. The woman tried to swim over to save her son, but after only a short distance, she saw a horrifying sight that made her freeze in terror. The giant black shadow had appeared right behind her son. It was slowly closing in, ready to strike a scene of extreme peril. The shadow emerged from the water right behind the child. It opened its massive maw, preparing to swallow its prey, giving the boy no chance to escape. Just as the ferryman had said, it was a great turtle, as large as a truck. It opened its mouth wide, intending to swallow the child whole. At the most critical moment, it echoed as another shot rang out. The great turtle's head was struck by another bullet, a devastating blow. The great turtle, writhing in pain, once again dived deep into the water. The woman seized the opportunity, clutching her son to her chest, too terrified to let go. That shot, of course, was fired by Old Demon. He had climbed onto a wooden plank and was shouting for the mother and son to swim to shore immediately. At the same time, he urged his own wife to swim to the bank. She asked worriedly, "If I go, what will happen to you?" She didn't want to leave him behind. Old Demon's voice became stern as he urged his wife to escape. "If you don't go now, it'll be too late," he yelled, his tone urgent. His wife knew her husband's temperament, so she followed the mother and son towards the shore. Old Demon, not one to sit and wait for death, straddled the plank, using the rifle as a makeshift paddle. He had only paddled a short distance when a massive swell of water rose behind him. It was 5 or 6 meters high, a truly terrifying and majestic sight. Old Demon knew the real monster had now appeared. Risking it all, he cursed under his breath, raised his rifle, and fired without hesitation. The monster that emerged from the river was a turtle as large as a truck. It swung its claw, sending the plank Old Demon was riding flying. Old Demon was thrown directly into the water. Unable to swim, he could only hold his breath and try to keep from sinking to the riverbed. The river water was murky and visibility was poor. He could vaguely make out a giant turtle swimming towards him. Death was closing in. As the great turtle swam before him, Old Demon felt his scalp tingle. Its sheer size was enough to strike terror into anyone. The great turtle had been shot by Old Demon earlier. It opened its mouth wide and lunged towards him, intending to swallow him whole. Old Demon used the current to dodge to one side. Seizing the opportunity, he reached out and grabbed onto the rugged contours of the great turtle's shell. The great turtle thrashed and rolled several times underwater, but couldn't shake Old Demon off. In fact, he used its momentum to climb onto its head. The enraged turtle burst to the surface with all its might. Old Demon seized the moment, found his footing, and pressed the muzzle of his rifle against its head. Old Demon, risking everything, shouted his terms to the great turtle, saying that if it couldn't understand human speech, then so be it. He proposed they negotiate, spare the child and take him to shore. In the future, he would present it with 3 offerings and it should consider the deal. It seemed the creature had accepted Old Demon's terms. It carried him to the riverbank and made no further attempts to attack. Once on shore, Old Demon clasped his hands and thanked the great turtle for sparing his life. The turtle did not linger. It turned and swam back into the deep water, disappearing from sight. Seeing the great turtle gone, Old Demon finally breathed a sigh of relief. He marveled that he had once again narrowly escaped death. Seeing that the danger had passed, the ferryman told the mother and son to thank Old Demon. However, the woman showed no gratitude and instead muttered a complaint. The ferryman was furious, but Old Demon paid it no mind. After facing such peril, simply being alive was a tremendous stroke of luck. Reaching the shore meant he could finally go home. Old Demon was as joyful as a child, running and jumping his way towards the village, his heart full of excitement and anticipation. In the previous story, Old Demon had resolved the troubles in the village. Finally, he and his wife returned to their hometown after a harrowing and perilous journey. Old Demon was no ordinary man. He was a legendary figure in everyone's eyes. As such, he was invited for drinks by one person after another, and he could refuse no one. His wife worried that drinking too much would cause his stomach problems to flare up again. She leaned in and quietly reminded him to drink less and not overdo it. Her reminder made the others at the table chuckle. They teased that Old Demon was kept on too tight a leash by his wife and had no freedom, but his wife only replied gently that she was merely concerned for his health. As everyone was laughing and chatting, the village chief's wife brought out a large platter of pork and vermicelli stew. The fragrant aroma of the food wafted everywhere, incredibly appetizing. Old Demon's wife asked her to sit down and eat with them. However, she replied that there were still 2 more dishes to prepare and she would be right out, her attitude exceptionally warm. The people at the table still hadn't left. The village chief had set up 3 banquet tables in his courtyard. People from every table came to offer Old Demon a toast, creating a lively atmosphere. He couldn't refuse a single invitation. Over the course of the evening, Old Demon drank until he was dead drunk, completely oblivious to the world. They drank until the moon was high in the sky, yet the party showed no signs of ending. The atmosphere was incredibly festive and joyful, with everyone lightheaded from the copious amounts of wine. At last, the time came when everyone was thoroughly drunk. Some were slumping in their chairs, others had collapsed right onto the table. No one was sober anymore. Old Jiao from the village staggered over and slung an arm around Old Demon's shoulder. He said that Old Demon's return was perfectly timed. There was trouble in the village and they needed his help. Old Demon curiously asked what had happened. Old Jiao explained that an invisible thief had appeared in the village, one that nobody could see. It was harvest season, and every household had a habit of storing their harvested grain in the storehouse. This was a crucial and laborious task. However, After filling the storehouse and locking it securely one day, they would find the next morning that the entire supply of grain had vanished into thin air. It was incredibly strange. The locks weren't broken, the windows were intact. An entire storehouse of grain would just disappear without a trace, and no one could explain it. Furthermore, it wasn't just one family. The grain from many households had disappeared. The villagers had reported it to the authorities, but no clues were found. Old Demon also found it rather strange. He wanted to ask for more details, but Old Jiao had already slumped onto the table, fast asleep from the drink. Old Demon looked around. There were passed out people everywhere. As he was observing, a figure furtively entered from the courtyard gate, looking very suspicious. Perhaps feeling the cold, the person had their face wrapped tightly in a scarf. They also wore ill-fitting clothes, leaving only a pair of narrow eyes visible. The person walked to a table and picked up a jug of wine. As he pulled down the scarf to drink, he revealed two incredibly sharp incisors, which was very strange. Seeing the person's bizarre appearance, Old Demon paid close attention. He wanted to see what this person's story was and if they were indeed suspicious. Seeing that the others at the table were dead drunk, the person drank with abandon. After he had downed a dozen cups, a tail suddenly sprouted from his back. The person finished all the wine on the table with great satisfaction. Old Demon decided to secretly follow him to see whether he was a man or a monster. Though Old Demon had drunk a great deal, he was still lucid enough. He stealthily followed the figure, keeping a safe distance to an abandoned house on the edge of the village. The person cautiously looked back over his shoulder. Seeing no one was following, he pushed the door open and entered without hesitation. Old Demon had already hidden behind a wall. He waited until the person was inside before emerging, determined to uncover the truth. Old Demon gently pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was pitch black, without a sliver of light, and the atmosphere was gloomy and chilling. However, once inside, he was somewhat stunned. He had clearly seen the person enter the house and not come out, so why was he nowhere to be found? The house was empty, without a single soul. There were no other exits either. Could the person have simply vanished for no reason? Lost in thought, Old Demon walked a lap around the house. In doing so, he noticed that a pile of straw on the ground looked somewhat unusual. Old Demon squatted down and began to brush the straw away. He wanted to see what was underneath, and whether it was the person's hiding place. A hole, a meter wide, was revealed. Normally, he wouldn't go down rashly, but today, having had quite a bit to drink and driven by the desire to learn the person's origins, he was compelled to act. The hole first went straight down for 3 to 5 meters. Then it turned horizontal, and he crawled through the passage for 3 to 5 minutes. When he reached the end of the tunnel, a vast cavern opened up underground. Old Demon carefully descended, his heart filled with curiosity and excitement. Within the dark cavern stood a city. However, its gates and walls were not tall, and it looked incredibly simple and strange. Old Demon moved closer to observe. The houses were built from sorghum stalks, a truly unique sight. Growing ever more curious as to what this place was, Old Demon crouched down and snuck inside, wanting to discover its secrets. Once inside the city walls, Old Demon felt his scalp tingle. The city was teeming with rats, a horrifying sight. These rats acted like the city's inhabitants. They went in and out of the doorways, huddled together, seeming to converse with one another. Old Demon's first instinct was to retreat and reconsider his plan. However, as he backed away, he inadvertently stepped on a dry sorghum stalk, making a snapping sound. In the cavern, the sound was piercingly loud. All the rats on the street turned their heads and stared intently in Old Demon's direction. The atmosphere was terrifying. "This is bad," Old Demon thought to himself. He turned to run, but the rats swarmed towards him as if they had gone mad. In an instant, they were crawling all over him. Old Demon ran forward, frantically brushing the rats off his body as he went. After a desperate struggle, he finally made it back to the entrance of the hole. He quickly scrambled out, hoping to escape the pursuing swarm. Old Demon crawled out of the hole. Along with him came a great number of large rats, showing no intention of letting him go. Old Demon ran straight back to the village to get help. He wanted to gather the villagers to deal with this aggressive swarm of rats. The moment he entered the courtyard, he yelled at the top of his lungs. "Wake up!" he shouted with extreme urgency. "Stop sleeping! The rats have become demons!" A few who weren't completely drunk and others who were half asleep were all startled by Old Demon shouting, not understanding what was happening. The villagers quickly noticed a horde of rats running amok on the ground. The sight filled them with horror and disgust. Old Demon gathered everyone. He recounted the entire event, from following the stranger and entering the cavern to being attacked by the rat swarm. Hearing this, the villagers could no longer sit still. The rats had built an entire city underground, a fact that was both incredible and terrifying. When they went into the abandoned house, they saw it was true. There was a large hole in the ground from which the rats had emerged. There was no mistake. Old Demon said there were two ways to deal with rats. One was with water, the other with smoke. But since the cavern was so large, smoke was their only option. That day was a chaotic one. Old Demon and the villagers lit fires, and smoke billowed from nearly every house in the village, a spectacular sight. The smoked out rats fled in a panic. The villagers gave chase, striking one whenever they saw one, killing a pair whenever they saw two, their actions relentless. When no more rats were running out of the hole, Old Demon led a group of men back down. He wanted to check the situation again. Those who went with him were all astonished. Who on earth had built this underground village? Could it really have been the rats? The group proceeded to the end of the passage. There, they saw a pile of grain as large as a small hill. Wasn't this the grain that had been stolen? The villagers hurriedly began to transport the grain outside. Old Demon, holding a torch, searched everywhere but found no sign of the man with the rat's tail. He thought he might have been drunk and mistaken what he saw. However, little did he know that he had just invited a great disaster upon himself, that grave danger was imminent. In the previous story, Old Demon had helped the villagers recover their lost grain. After everything was settled, he finally returned to his own home. Having been away for over 2 years, the courtyard was overgrown with weeds, and the house itself was somewhat dilapidated. He couldn't help but sigh at the desolation. A house is like that. If people live in it, even an old house can stand for 18 years. If no one lives in it, even a good house will fall into ruin in 3 to 5 years. His wife began cleaning inside, washing what needed washing and airing out what needed airing. She asked him to lend a hand and help clean up their home together. Seeing the rundown state of the house, Old Demon worried his wife would have to endure hardship for the next few days. He suggested they stay at the village chief's house for a few nights and come back once the cleaning was done. His wife felt that would be an imposition on others. However, as it happened, she mentioned that she had just discovered the stove in the house was broken, meaning they definitely wouldn't be able to light a fire that night. Old Demon lamented the fact. It turned out the chimney on the roof was broken, making it impossible to use the stove. They would have to endure a cold night's sleep. Throughout that night, Old Demon kept snuggling up to his wife. He complained that without a fire, it was genuinely cold, and hoped that lying close together would provide some warmth. The couple had just been through many hardships and encountered so much trouble. They both fell into a deep and sound sleep. However, in the middle of the night, Old Demon was shaken awake by his wife. She called to him softly, as if she had something very important to say. She said she had heard people talking in the room. The sound was very clear, unmistakable, and it made her anxious. Old Demon sat up and listened intently. He couldn't hear any voices at all and figured his wife must have misheard. His wife listened again for a moment, and sure enough, the voices were gone. Only then did she lie back down, relieved, and try to fall asleep. Though Old Demon said it was nothing, he didn't actually go back to sleep. His eyes were closed, but his ears were pricked. Sometime after midnight, he began to hear people talking. Two people were conversing. It seemed they had taken over his house after he left. Now that he was back, not only did they not want to leave, they wanted to drive him out. Lying in bed, Old Demon heard it all clearly. He wondered how such a thing could happen in this world, squatting in someone else's house and then trying to kick the owner out. Old Demon tried to turn over and sit up, but he found his body had become completely immobile. Apart from his eyes and mouth, he couldn't move anything. This is bad, Old Demon thought. I must have fallen into a trap. He glanced out of the corner of his eye and saw two pitch-black human figures approaching. He couldn't see their faces clearly, only vaguely making out that one was fat and one was thin. As the two dark figures drew near, Old Demon lost consciousness. When he awoke, it was already morning. He discovered that he and his wife were both sleeping in the courtyard, an incredibly strange and frightening situation that was impossible to explain. His wife woke up and immediately began sneezing from the cold. He asked with concern if she had caught a cold, his heart full of worry. Finding herself sleeping outside, she was just as astonished. She asked curiously what on earth had happened and why they were out there. Old Demon helped his wife inside. In his heart, he had a faint idea of what had happened. This house must have been occupied by something. Hearing that their home had been taken over by something else, his wife grew even more frightened. She didn't know what to do and could only cling tightly to her husband. Old Demon worried his wife would get sick, helped her into bed, covered her with a blanket, and said he would go to a neighbor's house to cook her a bowl of ginger soup. After comforting his wife with a few words, Old Demon put on his hat and went out. He promised to be back quickly and not keep her waiting long. Old Demon went to his neighbor Liu Kei's house. He explained his intentions and then started a fire to boil water for his wife's ginger soup. While he was tending the fire, Liu Kei and his wife began to chat. His wife said that if the stove couldn't be fixed right away, Old Demon's wife could stay with them for a few days. Old Demon then asked Liu Kei's wife a question. He wanted to know if she had ever heard any unusual noises coming from his house while he was away. At first, Liu Kei's wife said no, but then she suddenly remembered something, a very important and suspicious detail. Liu Kei's wife said she remembered now. Something strange had indeed happened. At night, she would often hear the sound of a dry cough coming from his courtyard. She had heard an old man's dry cough from Old Demon's yard on several nights. But when she climbed the wall to look, she never saw anyone. Hearing this, Old Demon began to understand. He picked up the finished bowl of ginger soup and left his neighbor's house, his mind deep in thought. Old Demon now had a plan in mind. He no longer felt lost. He had a strategy to deal with the squatters. Returning home, he gave the ginger soup to his wife. Afterward, he felt her forehead. She didn't have a fever, which finally put his mind at ease. Old Demon told his wife to go stay at the village chief's house for the night. He didn't want her to be in any danger and was deeply concerned for her safety. His wife was worried and tried to dissuade him, but Old Demon didn't hide his intentions. He explained his plan clearly. He wanted to expose the things that were infesting their home. Before she left, his wife reminded him once more to be careful, not to be reckless, and not to overexert himself. After seeing his wife off, Old Demon bolted the main gate. His face became incredibly stern as he prepared for the battle to come. He reached out and grabbed the pitchfork that was leaning in the corner. He was ready to deal with the uninvited guests without a shred of fear. Pitchfork in hand, Old Demon began to work in the courtyard. First, he tossed aside all the piles of weeds, searching for any trace of the intruders. Next, he knocked over a stack of bricks. He wanted to turn this entire courtyard upside down, determined to find whatever was hiding in his home. He searched every possible hiding place in the yard. However, he found not a single living creature. The silence was unnerving. Old Demon made a full circle around the yard. Only one place remained unsearched: the storeroom. He hoped he might find something there. He gripped his pitchfork and walked to the storeroom. "I don't believe I can't find you," he shouted, his determination resolute. Pushing open the storeroom door, a musty smell assaulted his nostrils. Since no one had lived there for 2 years, the storeroom was untouched, covered in dust and grime. Old Demon searched everywhere with his iron pitchfork, but just like in the yard, he found nothing out of the ordinary. Could my calculations be wrong? Old Demon wondered. As he was thinking, his eyes fell upon a cabinet in the corner, which looked very suspicious. Old Demon sensed something was wrong. He walked over, pushed the cabinet aside, and sure enough, a hole was revealed behind it, a secret passage. Old Demon found a pickaxe. He wanted to widen the hole in the wall so he could crawl inside and investigate. With just a few swings, he had widened the hole. Now he could enter and discover the secret it held, his heart filled with curiosity. He bent down and peered inside. Sure enough, there was something there. It was an unexpected and exciting discovery, well worth the effort. It was a small porcupine nest. Old Demon found a cloth sack, preparing to catch them all and give them no chance to escape. He put the entire nest of young porcupines into the sack. He had succeeded in capturing the intruders who had taken over his house. Next, he moved a large water jar into the courtyard. He placed all the small porcupines inside, preparing for the next phase of his plan. He covered the jar and then placed a large stone on top. He did this to ensure they could not escape. Old Demon lit his pipe and leaned against the wall. All he had to do was wait for their owners to come to him, a very clever plan. He waited like this late into the night. Exhausted from a long day's work, Old Demon eventually dozed off, his rifle in his arms. In a drowsy state, he heard someone speaking. The voice threatened him to release their children. Opening his eyes, he saw a man and a woman were standing before him. The woman's face was filled with anger, while the man looked incredibly fierce and menacing. Old Demon pretended to be unconcerned, stretching casually. In truth, he was a little scared, unsure if he could handle them. The two loudly demanded to know why Old Demon had captured their children. Without needing to ask, Old Demon knew they were talking about the nest of young porcupines. Old Demon didn't answer. He loaded his rifle and fired a shot into the air, a decisive and powerful action, without a hint of hesitation. Then he shouldered his rifle. The intimidation tactic worked. The man and woman immediately stopped shouting. The man seemed to concede, lowering his voice, though it was still laced with anger. Hearing his words, Old Demon refused to back down and began to argue. He debated with the man. He said, "This house is mine. You moved in without permission, and then you threw me out in the middle of the night." Old Demon's barrage of questions left the man speechless. He could only stand there in silence, not knowing what to do. The woman also realized that Old Demon was no ordinary person. She told the man to use a softer tone and beg him to release their children. The man's face was full of reluctance. However, after careful consideration, he bowed his head to Old Demon, admitting his mistake. Only then could Old Demon relax. He had been making a gamble, and luckily, his bluff had worked and he had managed to intimidate the pair. Old Demon removed the large stone and released the nest of small porcupines. The little ones scurried to their parents' side, a pitiful sight. The man and woman embraced their young and stood up to leave. With nowhere else to go, they couldn't help but feel a little sad and disappointed. Old Demon was not one who could bear to see such a scene. After a moment's thought, he realized he didn't have the heart to harm them, and an empty house was an empty house. He called them back and said they could stay, as long as they didn't cause trouble for him and his wife. The family was incredibly grateful and bowed their heads, thanking him profusely. Old Demon waved his hand and went out to bring his wife home, his heart full of joy and relief. From that day on, the old couple had a new joy in their lives, feeding the porcupines. Over time, the young porcupines would occasionally run into the yard to play, no longer afraid of them. The old couple, who had no children of their own, now had a form of companionship and no longer felt as lonely and empty as before. Except sometimes it wasn't so sweet. The little porcupine even dared to bite him, a cute and amusing act. In the previous story, Old Demon, moved by compassion, had taken in the porcupine family. Over time, the two families had become incredibly close and lived in harmony. In the evenings, with nothing else to do, Old Demon would call Father Porcupine out for a few drinks. Their bond grew stronger and stronger. One day, Old Demon asked his wife to stir-fry a few dishes and heat up a pot of wine. He set up a small table in the courtyard, preparing for a pleasant evening. Before long, the storeroom door creaked open. Father Porcupine stepped out from inside, without any hesitation or shyness, just like a member of the family. Seeing him, Old Demon quickly waved him over. He told him to come and sit, for the wine was already heated and fragrant. Both men filled their cups. Old Demon raised his, saying that they were a case of not knowing one another without a fight, and that living under the same roof was a matter of fate. Both were hearty men. They didn't speak much, simply downing their cups in one go, showing their mutual respect and fondness. After 3 rounds of wine and 5 courses of food, Father Porcupine spoke with hidden meaning. He said that Old Demon was a good, kind-hearted man and would surely be rewarded with good fortune. How perceptive was Old Demon? He understood immediately and told Father Porcupine to stop beating around the bush and say what was on his mind. Father Porcupine thought for a moment, then set his cup down. He said gravely that Old Demon was about to face a great calamity. Old Demon urged Father Porcupine to speak clearly. He couldn't understand why he was about to face a disaster and was filled with confusion and fear. Already tipsy from the wine, Father Porcupine told him everything he knew. The one seeking revenge on Old Demon was the man with the rat's tail whom he had encountered before. It seemed Father Porcupine was terrified of that rat spirit. He dared not get involved, fearing that not only would he fail to save Old Demon, but his own family would be dragged into it as well. Though he was powerless to help, he absolutely did not want to see Old Demon sit and wait for death, which is why he had to tell him so he could find a way to deal with it. He added that there was a temple on the western mountain dedicated to a sage of the Cat clan. He suggested that Old Demon go there and ask for the sage's help. That sage has now attained the way and can subdue the rat spirit. He is not dead. It is just that mortals can no longer see him. Hearing this, Old Demon leaned forward eagerly. He implored Father Porcupine to teach him how to meet the sage. Father Porcupine leaned in close and whispered the method to Old Demon. The wine was nearly finished, so the two parted ways. Nothing happened that night. Everything was peaceful, with no unusual or suspicious occurrences. Early the next morning, Old Demon left the house. He headed straight for the western mountain to find the sage's temple, hoping to find help. The temple had been built many years ago. It honored an old cat that had lived for several decades, but no one had seen it in recent years. Old Demon stood before the temple and followed Father Porcupine's instructions. He stated that offerings had been prepared at his home and invited the sage to enjoy them that evening. After speaking, he kowtowed several times before the shrine. He hoped his sincerity would move the great sage and that he would receive his help. After making his plea, Old Demon did not return home. He went straight to the bustling and crowded market. Along the way, he was greeted by acquaintances. They continuously hailed him, showing their affection and respect for the legendary figure. Old Demon, following Father Porcupine's advice, bought everything he would need, preparing for a volatile and dangerous evening. His wife asked curiously what was going on. He had no time to explain. He propped a ladder against the house and told her to grab a blanket and follow him up to the roof, saying it was urgent. His wife knew something was happening again. She didn't ask any more questions and simply followed him onto the roof, her heart filled with anxiety. He spread the blanket on the roof and told his wife to lie there quietly. Then he carefully climbed back down to prepare for the next step of his plan. He arranged everything he had bought from the market on the small table in the courtyard. A sumptuous feast was prepared, ready for an uninvited guest. The so-called 5 roasts consisted of roasted chicken, roasted duck, roasted goose, roasted pork, and heated wine. The fragrant aroma of the food wafted everywhere, incredibly enticing. After setting everything up, Old Demon climbed back onto the roof. His wife, full of confusion, asked him what on earth was going on. Old Demon stared intently at the main gate. He told his wife what Father Porcupine had said, that an enemy was coming to seek revenge. The couple lay on the roof until it was completely dark. He whispered to his wife not to make a sound. Someone had arrived. A dreadful silence fell. A figure was approaching the main gate. With one look, Old Demon recognized him as the stranger he had met at the drinking party. The man came to the main gate. Seeing it was barred, he used some unknown trick. With a loud crash, the gate fell to the ground. His wife, terrified, was about to scream, but Old Demon quickly covered her mouth. He couldn't risk her alerting the enemy. The stranger passed the 5 roasts, his mouth watering as he looked on greedily. He couldn't resist the allure of the delicious food. However, he restrained himself. He searched the house, the storeroom, and the courtyard, but found no trace of Old Demon. Unable to find Old Demon and unable to resist the temptation of the fine meal, the stranger walked to the table, intending to eat his fill. Just as he was about to reach for the food, someone stepped in behind him. It was a fat, bald old man who exuded an aura of imposing authority. He was no ordinary person. Seeing the fat old man, the stranger began to tremble like a leaf. He never expected to encounter such a formidable opponent and was terrified. With a swoosh, he transformed into a rat as large as a cat. It leaped towards the wall, intending to escape the looming threat. The old man also, with a swoosh, transformed into a massive tabby cat the size of a large dog. It looked incredibly fierce and menacing. The large rat jumped onto the wall in a single bound. The old tabby cat gave chase, giving it no chance to escape. With a single swipe, it pinned the large rat beneath its body. The rat was powerless against the cat's strength and could only struggle helplessly. As the large rat thrashed wildly, the old tabby cat bit off its tail. The scene was gruesome and terrifying, not for the faint of heart. The large rat, now tailless, let out a pathetic squeal and fled in terror. The old tabby cat did not pursue, letting it go. It leaped down from the wall and transformed back into the fat old man. He sat down at the table, not with hesitation or shyness, but with complete naturalness. Approaching the small table, he began to eat the roasted chicken and duck and drink the heated wine. He ate and drank voraciously, paying no mind to his surroundings. Like a whirlwind scattering clouds, he devoured all the food and wine on the table. After eating, he left the large rat's tail on the table and swaggered off. Once out the main gate, he vanished in the blink of an eye. He was gone, leaving the couple in a state of bewilderment and awe. Only then did Old Demon climb down from the roof. He wanted to get a closer look at the rat's tail, his heart full of curiosity. Picking up the large rat's tail from the table, he still felt a lingering fear. He marveled at his good fortune, having once again narrowly escaped death. Since their return home, they hadn't had a single day of peace. His wife wanted to return to the mountains, no longer wishing to face such things. As he repaired the main gate, Old Demon comforted his wife. He said that the mountains were not much more peaceful. There was worry every day there as well. And Old Demon was not wrong. Although they had encountered so much misfortune, each time a noble benefactor had come to their aid, they were truly lucky. Old Demon then asked his wife to prepare some more wine and food. He said they must invite Father Porcupine for a meal to thank him for his kindness. Later, Old Demon fashioned the large rat's tail into a whip. There was no animal it could not tame. I will tell you more about that in the future. In the previous story, while at the market preparing for the feast, Old Demon had accidentally overheard a terrifying secret. A demon horse had come to the village to lure other horses away. One day, after finishing breakfast and with nothing else to do, Old Demon went out for a stroll. He wanted to check the situation in the village and hopefully hear more about the story. On the road, he ran into Old Joe. The two exchanged a few friendly words, asking after each other's health and work. Old Joe invited Old Demon to his house for a drink when he had time. He greatly admired and respected a legendary figure like him. In the eyes of the villagers, being able to drink with a man of Old Demon's caliber was an honor. After a brief chat, Old Demon continued on his way. From a distance, he saw Liu Bao frantically asking a passerby if they had seen his horse. He looked extremely worried and agitated. He explained that he had woken up early that morning to find his horse gone. In the countryside, a horse is a significant asset, very important and valuable. As Old Demon was about to walk over and ask what was wrong, he saw a woman also rushing by, searching for her own horse. Old Demon thought to himself that everyone seemed to be looking for their horse today. This string of events struck him as rather strange and suspicious. So he casually asked a question. He was curious to know when and how everyone's horses had gone missing. The woman said her story was the same as Liu Bao's. She woke up in the morning and the horse was gone, as if taken by a thief. A few of them gathered together, discussing whether a thief was to blame. Old Demon remarked that such a thief would have to be incredibly bold. The two victims went together to the village chief's house to report the situation. Old Demon continued his stroll, lost in thought. Suddenly seeing a group of people playing chess by the roadside, he went over to watch. He wanted to see if he could overhear any more information. Old Demon wasn't skilled at chess, so he stood to one side with his arms crossed. He listened to see if anyone knew anything about the missing horses. During their conversation, someone mentioned that another villager had also lost a horse a few days ago. This made Old Demon feel that something was definitely wrong. Old Demon inquired further. He wanted to know more about the incident, hoping to find a clue to solve the problem. The man said the other villager's horse had been gone for more than 10 days and still hadn't been found. He woke up one morning and the horse was gone from the stable without a trace. Having walked enough, Old Demon returned home. That evening, with time on his hands, he invited Father Porcupine out for a drink, intending to ask about the situation. He told Father Porcupine frankly that this wine wasn't for free. He wanted to ask about the matter of the missing horses in the village, hoping to get an answer. As it turned out, Father Porcupine did know about it. Old Demon then asked curiously if he knew who was responsible. Father Porcupine seemed to know something but hesitated to speak. His attitude only made Old Demon more suspicious and curious. Old Demon had already thought of a way to handle him. He said that if you eat a man's food, you're obliged to help him. Sure enough, faced with Old Demon's words, Father Porcupine couldn't refuse. He opened up and told him the whole truth, holding nothing back. The horses in the village had been disappearing because they were being taken. Old Demon asked who on earth was doing this. And the one who had taken the horses was not human. After hearing this secret, Old Demon couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. Hearing this, Old Demon could no longer sit still. If it wasn't the work of a person, then what could it be? He didn't understand. Old Demon pressed for more answers. But Father Porcupine didn't want to say more, telling him it was best he go see for himself. However, Father Porcupine leaned in close to Old Demon's ear. He whispered instructions on how to handle the matter, a clever and risky plan. Nothing happened that night. The next morning, Old Demon woke early, preparing for a dangerous adventure. He was busying himself with something in the courtyard. His wife asked curiously what he was doing, not understanding his strange actions. When his wife got closer, she saw that he was braiding that disgusting rat's tail into a whip. She asked what he planned to do with it. Old Demon flicked the finished whip. He told his wife about the missing horses in the village and that a terrible, unbelievable secret lay behind it. His wife had heard quite a bit about the matter. She began to curse the horse thief, saying he was devoid of virtue for 8 generations. After finishing the whip, Old Demon turned and went back to the bedroom to catch up on sleep. His wife didn't understand why he was going to bed at this hour. He told his wife not to wake him. He had to be well rested, as he had important business to attend to that night and could not afford to be careless. By evening, Old Demon was well fed and fully rested. He took the whip made from the rat's tail and went out the door, ready for a life or death battle. Following Father Porcupine's instructions, he went to the western side of the village. Then, he followed the wall and climbed onto a rooftop, a very risky maneuver. Old Demon was no longer a young man. He panted as he climbed onto the roof. Looking down, he felt a surge of fear and tension. He sat on the roof and took out his wine flask. He drank as he waited for the thing Father Porcupine had described to appear, his heart pounding with suspense and anxiety. He waited like this until after midnight. Dark clouds suddenly gathered in the night sky, obscuring the moon, a sign that something ominous was about to happen. Old Demon heard the clip-clop of horse hooves. The sound grew closer, making him feel a little uneasy. He crawled up and looked out in the direction of the sound. At the edge of the village, he saw a tall horse running in a truly demonic sight. As the horse drew nearer, Old Demon was stunned. It was no ordinary horse. It was a demon horse. The horse was incredibly tall. Its 2 eyes glowed a furious red. It snorted white gas from its nostrils, and its hooves were as large as bowls, leaving a pit in the ground with every step. The horse quickly ran into the village. Old Demon hid on the roof, watching it intently, not daring to let his guard down. The horse ran below, and he ran above. It was as if they were playing a game of chase, a tense and thrilling scene. This took a heavy toll on Old Demon's old body. At his age, one misstep could mean a fall from the roof. The great horse ran to the edge of the village, to an old farmer's house. It stopped at the gate, reared its head, and let out a piercing neigh. In the farmer's stable, the horse inside grew restless. It became agitated and uneasy, as if bewitched by the demon horse. Finally, it strained and snapped its reins, walking to the main gate. It was completely under the demon horse's control, devoid of its own will. It even used its mouth to unlatch the gate, a display of unnatural intelligence not typical of an ordinary horse. It followed the great horse out of the village. Old Demon, on the roof, carefully moved closer, trying not to be seen. He seized the opportunity and jumped. A decisive and powerful leap without a hint of hesitation or fear. He landed on the great horse's back. The sight was extraordinary, spectacular, and terrifying, not something just anyone could do. With the rider on its back, the great horse would not submit. It neighed loudly and kicked its hind legs furiously, trying to throw Old Demon off. It bucked and leaped, trying to dislodge Old Demon. He held on to the mane with one hand and fiercely lashed its body with the whip in the other. He yelled at the top of his lungs, his voice carrying a powerful and courageous threat with no trace of fear. But the horse would not listen. Unable to throw Old Demon off, it charged forward with all its might, running wildly. It carried Old Demon out of the village. Its speed was uncontrollable, creating an extremely perilous chase. Old Demon used all his strength. He clamped his legs tightly around the horse's belly, gripped the mane, and whipped it relentlessly, never faltering. The great horse carried Old Demon on a mad dash. Its speed was indescribable. It ran with every ounce of its energy. Leaving the village, it headed straight for the Western Mountains. It was taking him somewhere, a mysterious place unknown to anyone. After crossing a stream and running an unknown distance, it finally stopped. Old Demon thought to himself that it was a good thing. If it had run any further, he would have been thrown off. Old Demon panted as he surveyed his surroundings. The horse had brought him to a stream, and in the distance he could see a dozen or so horses grazing. He didn't need to ask to know. These were all the horses taken by the great horse. He just hadn't expected there to be so many. After a moment's rest, Old Demon raised his whip. The great horse reared up and let out a long neigh, as if it had been subdued. The grazing herd of horses all fell in line behind it. They were completely under its control, with no will of their own. Old Demon cracked the whip a few times, and the great horse headed back towards the village. He had succeeded in taming it, a truly glorious victory. Old Demon, riding the horse, felt the wind roar in his ears. It was as fast as riding the clouds and treading the wind, an incredibly exhilarating and freeing sensation. It wasn't long before they reached the village. A few villagers who were out searching for their horses were astonished to see a herd of horses approaching in a cloud of dust. The villagers saw that Old Demon had found all the missing horses, and what's more, he had brought back a rare and magnificent great horse. They were all speechless with admiration. Old Demon told the villagers to come and get their horses. Any unclaimed ones were to be handed over to the village police for handling a fair judgment. When he got home, he was both happy and exhausted. He told his wife to prepare some wine and food and called Father Porcupine out from the storeroom for a drink to thank him. Old Demon felt that Father Porcupine must be a celestial being. Without his guidance and help, his own life would likely have been lost long ago. After a few cups of wine, he asked Father Porcupine about the great horse's origins. He wanted to know more about it and couldn't rest easy. Father Porcupine knew quite a bit. He told Old Demon the entire story of the great horse, not hiding a single detail. When he was nearly drunk, Father Porcupine stood up to return to his room. His parting words were somewhat cryptic, leaving Old Demon deep in thought. The so-called fortune within misfortune. Old Demon had acquired a horse of the highest quality, but he did not know if it was good luck or if it would bring great disaster in the future.